I found the photograph by accident. It was tucked inside the back pocket of an old notebook I hadn't opened in years. The edges had yellowed, the paper curled slightly, like it was holding its breath through time. And there she was, Clara Bennett, smiling at me through the faded gloss of memory. Her hair was shorter then, a soft chestnut brown that caught the sunlight like autumn leaves. I remember taking that photo on a Sunday morning by the Thames. She had insisted the wind made her look ridiculous, and I had laughed, saying it only made her look more alive. Now, staring at that frozen smile, I realized how much of her I'd forgotten, not because I wanted to, but because forgetting was the only way to keep breathing. The city outside my window hummed quietly, London wrapped in its usual gray melancholy. People walked fast, clutching coffee cups and unread dreams. And I wondered how many of them were carrying ghosts, too. Faces that still haunted them in photographs. Voices that only existed in late-night silence. I slipped the photo back into the notebook, not because I was ready to forget again, but because I finally understood what I had lost. It wasn't just Clara. It was the version of myself who still believed love could outlast time. I met Clara on a morning that smelled like rain and coffee. It was spring, but London had its usual indecision between drizzle and sunlight. I was 24, barely out of university, trying to prove that I could build a life on my own terms. She was 22, interning at a small publishing house on Fleet Street. We met because she spilled her coffee on my sketches. I remember her apology, quick and breathless. "I'm so sorry. Oh God, that was your work, wasn't it?" Her voice trembled slightly, and she looked up at me with wide, embarrassed eyes. I should have been angry. Those drawings had taken me nights to finish. But instead I laughed. Not because it wasn't a big deal, it was, but because something about her made anger feel useless. She insisted on buying me another coffee. We sat by the window, the rain finally giving up, and the light broke through the clouds like a quiet blessing. She asked about architecture, about why I chose it, and I told her about wanting to build something that could last longer than feelings. She smiled and said, "But feelings are what make things last, aren't they?" I didn't know then that she would prove herself right. I didn't know that the things I built would crumble, and that her memory, her laugh, her warmth, would be the only structure that never collapsed. The summer we fell apart wasn't dramatic. There were no fights in the rain, no shattered plates or shouted goodbyes. Just silence, the kind that grows between two people who stop trying to understand each other. I had taken a project abroad, a 6-month contract in Berlin. Clara said she understood that it was a good opportunity, but I remembered the way she smiled when she said it, as if understanding was the only thing left she could give me. We wrote at first, emails long and thoughtful, about books she was editing and buildings I was designing. But somewhere between weeks and months, our words began to shrink. A miss you became hope you're well. And eventually, even those stopped coming. The last letter I wrote to her was never sent. It was 2 pages long, written in the hotel at 3 a.m., after a night of walking through Berlin's empty streets. I told her I missed the way she looked at me when I talked about things that didn't matter. I told her I still traced the outline of her hand on the side of my coffee mug. I told her I was scared, that maybe love had an expiration date, and that ours was running out faster than I could hold on. The next morning I folded the letter, slipped it into the envelope, and never mailed it. Years later I found it again, the ink slightly blurred, the paper still carrying the faint scent of the room's cheap cologne. Reading it now, I realized I hadn't written to her at all. I'd written to the version of me that still believed she'd be waiting. Time has a way of making even the sharpest memories go quiet. The days blurred into months, the months into years, and before I knew it, 5 winters had come and gone. Berlin became New York. Drafting tables turned into office meetings, and I learned to talk about deadlines instead of dreams. Clara faded from my sentences the way sunlight fades from late afternoons. People stopped asking about her. Maybe they sensed I didn't want to answer, or maybe they knew the truth, that I had already answered by staying silent. Sometimes, though, she'd appear, not in person, but in the smallest, cruelest ways. In a stranger's laugh that sounded too much like hers. In the smell of old books on a rainy day. In the song that came on at a cafe just as I was about to forget. I told myself I had moved on, that what we had was beautiful because it ended. But every time I stood by the Thames again, looking at the water that never stopped moving, I knew I was lying. Time didn't heal anything. It just taught me how to hide the wound. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of day that feels like it's waiting for something to begin. I was walking out of a small gallery near Covent Garden, a place I used to visit when I needed silence that didn't feel empty. And there she was, Clara. She stood by the window of a cafe across the street, her hair longer now, waves brushing her shoulders, her posture calm, but her eyes, those same eyes, still carried that unguarded light I thought I'd forgotten. For a moment I forgot how to breathe. The world around me seemed to slow, the city noise fading into a quiet hum. She didn't see me at first. She was laughing at something someone said, a man sitting across from her. He reached across the table, touching her hand gently, and she didn't pull away. That small gesture should have felt ordinary, but it broke something in me I didn't know was still whole. I almost walked away. God knows I wanted to. But she looked up then, and our eyes met through the glass. Her smile faltered, just slightly. Recognition flickered like a match struck in the dark. She whispered something to the man, stood up and stepped outside. "Ethan," she said, and hearing my name and her voice again felt like opening an old wound. We walked without deciding where to go. London at night was a quiet ache, the kind that hides beneath the hum of the city. Street lights spilled over wet pavement, and our reflections stretched long and thin, like ghosts still trying to recognize themselves. Clara spoke first. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Her tone was soft, not surprised, more like she was admitting a truth she'd rehearsed in her head for years. "Neither did I said. The words felt small, like they didn't deserve the space between us. We ended up at the bridge, the same one where we took that photograph years ago. The river glimmered with city lights, and for a moment it felt like nothing had changed. But it had. Everything had. She told me about her work, the books she edited, how she moved apartments 3 times but still couldn't sleep without the sound of rain. I told her about buildings I'd designed, how I built homes for other people while never finding one for myself. At some point, she asked quietly, "Why didn't you write?" I laughed, a small, broken sound. "I did," I said. "I just never said it." She looked at me, eyes shining like she might cry but wouldn't let herself. "I waited, you know. Not forever, but long enough to realize you weren't coming back." I wanted to tell her that I almost did, that I had booked the flight, packed the suitcase, but fear, that quiet, stubborn thing, had talked me out of it. Instead, I said nothing. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was heavy, like a second heartbeat neither of us could ignore. When the clock struck midnight, she smiled faintly. "Some things don't belong to time," she said, and I knew she was right. But that didn't mean they still belonged to us. Dawn crept in slowly, washing the city in a pale, forgiving light. We had talked for hours, though most of it was silence, the kind that feels like truth. Clara stood by the railing of the bridge, her hands tucked into her coat pockets, watching the river catch the first blush of morning. I wanted to memorize her like that, not the way she had been, but the way she was now, quiet, certain, untouchable. She turned to me and smiled. "I should go," she said softly. "He's probably waiting." It took me a moment to realize she meant the man from the cafe. And when I did, it didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It just settled, like dust on an old photograph finally coming to rest. "I'm glad you're happy," I said. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. She stepped closer, just enough for the wind to catch her hair against my sleeve. "Do you ever think about us?" she asked. "All the time," I said, "but not like before. It's different now." She nodded, a small, understanding motion. "Good," she whispered. "That means we lived." And then she walked away. No dramatic goodbyes, no tears, just the sound of her footsteps fading into the hum of the city. I stayed on the bridge a while longer, watching the water move beneath me, each ripple carrying something I no longer needed to keep. When I finally turned to leave, I realized the sun had risen completely, and for the first time in years, the light didn't hurt.